Hello to all the pessimistic, optimistic, and everyone in between. My name is Connor Philippi, and welcome back to the Minnesotan Sports Podcast. It's been at least 2 months now, or close to 2 months now, since I have uploaded a video. So I apologize for that. There's a couple things that got in the way, but today I'm going to be talking about the rules that were put in place to start the MLB season. We saw a little glimpse of it during spring training. I was going to make a video where I was kind of going to talk about it based off of the few games in spring training I saw, but I decided to wait and see how those things would be implemented in regular season and how the teams would fare and how I would feel about it. But I've had a pretty consistent opinion about this whole time, so I just wanted to kind of share my thoughts about very specifically the pitch clock rule, but also a couple of those other rules that were implemented. So I want to talk about this pitch clock because it's been a serious point of contention between fans. There seems to be kind of a gap between fans that like it, think that they like that the game gets sped up and that some of the things that don't really need to be in the game are being taken out. But then there are those super traditionalist fans that anytime there's a rule that's made that changes the way things have been done for a while, or they just feel like anything is changing in the game, they feel like it's bad because, the game was always played a certain way, traditional, this, that, like all that stuff. I've always been a fan of this pitch clock rule. Are there people saying it should be maybe 25 seconds or 30 seconds instead of 20? Maybe that should be the case, but so far I think it's been working really well. The first reason I have for why I feel this way is we've seen in the last few weeks, it's not been causing too many problems. But today there was one situation where a player struck out. The one downside of it is because, let's say it's an 0-2 count and a pitcher has been on an absolute tear and they're trying to get a strikeout and then the pitch clock violation robs them of that strikeout. I think most players would still just be in favor of the out. If you're really a team player, you don't really care about stats as much, but it would be unfortunate if a player was trying to go for their personal record of strikes in a game, or maybe the franchise record for strikeouts in a game, and one of those strikeouts that they could have gotten was taken away because of a pitch clock violation. That being said, we really have not seen a whole lot of pitch clock violations. We thought we'd see all these different situations where teams would lose games because of it early on, and players have adjusted to it really quickly, and honestly, I've not seen a lot of players complaining about it or saying anything bad about it. Maybe they're hiding that, but for the most part, I think players seem to be pretty on board with it as much as they could be. The second point is just for the traditionalists out there. Even as a lover of this game, even as a person who loves the game of baseball, I have my entire life, and it's really frustrating when these people are out here saying you're not a real fan of the game if you want the pitch clock. You're a fake fan if you aren't fine with the game being longer, because why would you complain about more baseball? But here's my point. It's not more baseball. The action is the same. We're still watching the same amount of action as we have for decades. The only thing that's changed is the time in between. It's not like you're missing any more baseball. You're watching the same amount of baseball. The thing that is getting taken out is the whole that kind of thing. That's a horrible representation of what players do, but it's really true. That's the only stuff that you're missing out on. And I personally don't feel like I'm missing out on it now. There's no negative part of that stuff not being in the game for me. Maybe a couple players are being tripped up by it a little bit, but for the most part, I just don't understand how that is such a point in contention. Why do people want to see that? And even with all the stuff, I love baseball. I don't want to watch a game for 3.5 to 4 hours. I just don't. I have things to do. That brings me to my second point, which is people are in uproar about this. People are talking about how this will never, this will change the game forever and all that, which it's pretty clear at this point. Players are already adjusting. Fans are already adjusting. By mid-season, this is going to be completely normal. But people talking about how like this totally changed the game, changed it for the worse, and people saying that, they were never going to stop complaining about it. Remember a few years ago when the rules changed and pitchers had to pitch to at least 3 batters? That I don't really remember a time when that wasn't the case anymore. It only happened a few years ago. People were acting like it was going to completely change the league. I haven't seen anyone complain about that since that year, the year that it was implemented. It just, there are rules that people think are going to ruin the game, that are changing the game, that the league's never going to be the same because of it, and it's not as big a deal as people make it out to be. So that's just my second point. Also, people need to understand that this is not the way the game used to be. I don't really get, because people are always saying, oh man, just hold on to tradition. Players can do whatever they want, and but look at these numbers. These numbers I pulled. 1970, the average game was 234. 1990, the game was 251, and in 2022, it was 306. So in the span of 50 years, game time has been slowly creeping up. And it's not like it's not based on commercials or anything like that, because, you have to have that time for pitchers to go out and warm up. Maybe you can cut that time down a little bit, and maybe couple minutes of commercials are bringing the game time up from that initial statistic, but that's not the way the game used to be. Pitchers would always pitch pretty quickly. Hitters would go through their progressions very quickly. This is a new phenomenon where players are getting more and more comfortable with these little things they've picked up over the years, and it never used to be that way. So that's another thing where you can't act like that's some thing that's always been there. It hasn't. So all those things combined, are just why I think it's a good thing for the pitch clock. Games are getting done between 2 and 2.5 hours now, and it has nothing to do with, in my opinion, it has nothing to do with new fans getting involved. Because let's be honest, baseball is, in a general sense, in terms of constant action, it's a little more slower paced of a game. I don't like it any less for that reason. I love baseball, but let's be honest here, changing the length of the game from 3 hours to 2.5 hours is not going to change the fact that some people just think that slow pace is boring and not fun to watch. That's not going to change, and if you feel that way, all power to you. Everyone likes different things. So I have nothing, that argument of new fans getting engaged, I don't think has anything to do with it. These are just the 3 reasons or 4 reasons or whatever I named for why I think it's a good idea to keep the pitch clock and why I think it should stay for the time being. And then the next 2 things are very, very small things compared to the first one. But the 2 other things, base size, I don't have any problem with that rule. I don't see why it would be an issue. I haven't seen a whole lot of extra bases stolen since that's been implemented. The one thing I don't understand is one of the main reasons they wanted to do it was for safety on first base. The other reason was they wanted to try and increase people stealing second base and everything like that to get more players in scoring position. But the other reason was there were too many of those situations where a player would step on another player's foot on first. If that safety issue is one of the concerns, I don't get why they don't just do the softball thing where they've got the main base and then they have like the orange extension on the first base side, and then the runner's supposed to run through that part of it, and then the fielder's supposed to stand on the first base. I don't see why they don't just do that. But anyway, that's not an issue for me. I don't really care about the base size. Don't make it 3 times the size, because that would be kind of ridiculous, but I don't really see why that would be that big a deal. And then finally, the shift. I personally do like this rule. It's one of those things that I do think, it's nice to be back to tradition with that. That's one of the few things that I feel like should stay with the way it's always been, because that's something that actually affects the way hitters hit the ball. There should just be, players in the outfield, players on the infield, keep it relatively on one side and let the batter actually try and find holes instead of completely changing the way a batter has to approach. There's players with strengths and weaknesses, and if you talk about a rule that really punishes certain players just for the way they like to hit the ball, that's actually a rule that I think should have been taken away and never should have existed. So I'm glad that is being changed. But honestly, though, this is a good example of those traditionalists completely changing their view, because all of a sudden people are talking about the shift as something that needs to stay, and they're like, oh man, like you can't just change that back. But what happened to being traditional? That was supposed to be the way it's always been, with no shift. And then it got changed where you could shift, and people started liking it a little bit. So then when it got taken away, people were in an uproar. But what happened to tradition? It's just a great example of how things over a few years change, and people just accept it and move on. And I like the pitch clock. You can't take that away from me. That's my opinion. If you want to argue in the comments, please let me know what you think, and we can have a discussion about it. But that's just my personal belief as a young sports fan. I don't think it has anything to do with, people are saying, oh, young people have no attention span, that's why. Not really. If you have that small of an attention span, you can't watch a 2-hour game, a 1-hour game, or a 3-hour game. Like, that has nothing to do with it. But that's just my opinion. So let me know in the comments what you think. In a few days after the first game of the White Sox series that the Twins play, I'll go over the first 10 games of the Twins season, and I'll give you my opinion about how they're looking so far. But fingers crossed that they keep playing as well as they have, because they're currently 6-2 as of this video being recorded. So everything's looking good there. And then I'll give some feelings about what I think should happen in the NFL draft, some other players that haven't been signed yet in free agency. All that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. But thanks so much for watching this one. Please like and subscribe and let me know what else you want me to do. And I'll see you on the flip side.